Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a wedding venue stuffed to its velvet seams. The chandeliers flicker softly overhead, and you breathe in rosewater, caramelized sugar, and heavily starched linens hanging thick in the air. Scores of women rush by, clutching teacups on rattling saucers, while a string quartet in the alcove tackles a waltz nobody's brave enough to dance to. You dodge a server hauling a platter piled high with little cucumber sandwiches, and then you spot it. Not the bride, not the groom, but the cake. It towers at the ballroom's far end, taller than anyone present. It's stacked like a confectionery high-rise reaching into the gaslit haze, with frosted audacity. You tally 6 layers of cake, each more ridiculously adorned than the one below. Marzipan cherubs balance on ledges. Sugar paste birds, complete miniature gardens. A cascading fountain of spun sugar that streams soundlessly from level to level. The crowd murmurs as they shuffle past. One weathered woman snorts and grumbles might as well have wed the baker. You edge nearer and catch the gossip. The groom's people run a maritime business. This confection was transported from London via rail, then coach. It needed a pulley mechanism and 3 workers to manoeuvre it through the side entrance. And no, that bottom layer isn't edible. It's merely plaster, colour-matched to look taller. Because absolutely everything must exceed the cousin ceremony last spring. You finally locate the bride. She's tiny, hardly 5 feet tall, with a waist so compressed she appears ready to snap if she breathes wrong. Her gaze flicks anxiously between the cake and her groom, who's striking a pose with a monocle and a brooding, intense expression that clearly took considerable mirror practice. When the cake-cutting moment arrives, pandemonium breaks loose. The blade, which was custom engraved for this occasion, falls short. A servant produces a longer blade. Someone proposes a saw. The bride's papa insists they serve the middle section because the top exists purely for show and the bottom is hollow. Finally, a portion is extracted from the 3rd level like some precious relic and presented to the bride with a lace cloth. She grins and then promptly drops it directly onto her shoe. The hush is razor sharp. You catch your breath. Then the groom begins chuckling and gradually the entire room joins in. The cake, spectacular and preposterous, has shattered the awkwardness. They sample pieces one by one, acting like it tastes better than it actually does. Later, you catch someone mention it was baked with rice flour because it preserves longer. They're not consuming it, she murmurs. They're preserving it for posterity. It's not a sweet, it's a memorial. And as the final chord of the waltz dies and the bride is escorted away to change into her departure outfit, you peek back one final time at that immense cake. It's still upright, taller than she is, taller than reason, and destined maybe to endure in family stories far longer than the union itself. You trace the path of frosting, smudged linens and champagne splatters into the smaller sitting room, where guests now cluster around what they're calling the cake critique. Evidently, this is customary. You end up next to a duo of aunts, chattering like art critics at an exhibition opening. One witnessed something similar at the Duke of Norfolk's ceremony, one mentions, but that one featured actual gold foil. The other responds smugly, "This looks like copper sugar at most." You pretend to examine a sugar blossom just to blend in. Then the bride's kid brother barges in, face flushed, a cake slice sliding across his dish. Mother says avoid the top layer. He declares it's for the first baby's baptism. Right, exactly, a Victorian custom. The newlyweds preserve the uppermost tier, bundled in muslin, for their firstborn's christening. You glance at the towering creation again and realise they have zero idea how to store it. One relative suggests sealing it in glass like a holy relic. Another claims they'll inter it underground to keep it chilled. Then comes the quintessential Victorian touch. Someone produces a wedding cake album. You blink twice. Yes, it's authentic. Apparently stylish women snip icing ornaments from the cake, flatten them between pages and preserve them like pressed blooms. Keepsakes, they explain. History and confection. You lean over a shoulder and observe a preserved sugar bird next to a silk ribbon fragment. Someone's inscribed, Marriage of Millicent Grayson. 1863, cake parched, bride, jittery groom balding. By 1870, Victorians genuinely loved documenting everything, even how arid their desserts were. Then naturally comes the edible mayhem. The cake is so compact it warps, forks. The icing has the texture of adhesive wallpaper. A young girl weeps after chomping into what she expected was chocolate, but proved to be spice, probably caraway, a standard Victorian ingredient that tastes like bewilderment and regrettable choices. One gentleman swears he discovered a clove substantial enough to spark international trade, and yet, despite the sugar exhaustion, everyone is glowing, because this isn't about taste, it's about spectacle. Extravagance appearances. One elderly man in formal wear says through a mouthful of almond paste, "My friend." They'll discuss this cake long after they've forgotten the bride's identity, and he's likely correct. You notice a woman attempting to sketch the cake before it gets dismantled. A footman is bundling slices in wax paper to send home with visitors. Someone actually requests if they can claim a sugar cherub for their mantle. Nobody refuses, because in this peculiar, ostentatious moment, the cake has surpassed dessert. It has transformed into an emblem of prosperity, of aspiration, of how, in Victorian culture, even your confection had to stand erect, sport a top hat and vie for notice. You sample a corner of your portion, taste like nutmeg and frigid stone, but you grin nonetheless, because you recognise this. In 50 years, someone will still be recounting the story of the ceremony, where the cake towered over the bride, where the frosting fractured like granite, and where a solitary sugar swan existed forever in an album. The subsequent wedding you attend feels more subdued, more peculiar, less champagne brilliance, more hushed velvet. The sitting room is quiet, with guests positioned like wax sculptures around a single luminous focal point. The bride. She remains motionless beneath a lace-covered archway, eyes locked ahead, lips barely opened. Initially, you don't register what's strange. The atmosphere is dense with lavender and mothballs, and her gown seems, well, ordinary enough. Ivory silk, voluminous skirts, tall collar, the typical Victorian refinement. But then a shimmer catches your attention. Not from beads, not from pearls, from something. Hair. You lean forward just slightly, and there it sits. Strands of copper and brown woven carefully along the border, stitched in elaborate spirals, sewn into the lace sleeves, even wound into the embroidered monogram on the bodice. ETW. Her initials, apparently. You feel a shiver. Was this exclusively hers? No, that would be far too straightforward. A bridesmaid edges closer and whispers. She requested everyone to contribute. Family, acquaintances, even the minister's wife mailed a braid by courier. You observe the dress with fresh perspective, the texture you mistook for raised needlework. Braids of actual human hair, some dense, some thin, some of vivid copper that couldn't conceivably match hers. Apparently, it began as a sentimental notion, a method to carry a fragment of everyone she cherished into the marriage. But as additional hair arrived in letters and packages, she declined to halt. It became a compilation. Someone mumbles. A compilation she donned. You glimpse the groom, lanky, anxious, one hand compulsively stroking his sideburns. He hasn't touched the bride yet. Perhaps he's terrified of getting entangled. The guests fidget in their seats, and you catch a spirited discussion. One aunt claims hair embroidery was typical in Victorian mourning craft. Lockets, pins, even complete wall hangings constructed from the locks of loved ones. Another maintains this isn't mourning, it's dedication. She transformed mourning craft into marriage craft, she says with subdued pride. But not everyone concurs. A young relative leans toward you and stage murmurs, "Mother says it's unhygienic." And honestly, the nearer you examine, the more it seems like the dress might respire. Every time she shifts, the strands appear to glisten and ripple like they harbour sentiments. The ceremony commences. The bride floats down the pathway, and as she passes, you're certain you detect beeswax and rose water and something sharper underneath it. Not decomposition, not grime, just scalp, dusted and scented and woven into affection. It's captivating and vaguely disturbing, but also profoundly, peculiarly Victorian. Because in a society fixated on remembrance, with sentiment, with keeping everything conserved, what superior method to eternalize devotion than by stitching your wedding dress with the literal genetic material of your social network? You glance down at your gloves, ivory kid leather, immaculate, and suddenly they seem very dull. After the promises are exchanged, her voice scarcely audible beneath the burden of the garment, the guests are guided into the parlour for tea and pastries. But nobody can cease discussing the dress. They whisper in groups around the tea urn, speculating about whose contribution is whose in the stitches. One woman insists she identified her own contribution in the border. "Deep copper, from my school braid. Mailed in May," another whispers. She contributed hers reluctantly. It was collected from a hairbrush after an overnight stay. That can't genuinely be accurate, can it? You settle beside the fireplace, sampling a lemon biscuit, observing as the bride tries to sit. The dress objects. It doesn't wrinkle like regular fabric. The seams stiffen. The lengthy braids along the skirt twist just enough to make her pause. Eventually, she balances awkwardly on the rim of a carved sofa, like a monument on exhibition. Someone mentions how hair jewellery was once a fashionable engagement gift. A ring wrapped with the sweetheart's curl, a bracelet of delicate braid. But this is construction, not an ornament. And then the fringe revelation surfaces. Literally, a fringe constructed entirely of moustache clippings. Yes, moustache clippings. It's not apparent at first inspection, but up close, the tassels dangling gently from the sleeves aren't silk. They're fine, coarse strands, collected and twisted with painstaking care. The groom's barbershop companions had contributed as a jest, and she had the fringe attached as a caution. She maintained to remind him, she told a relative, of what he owes me and how rapidly it can be trimmed. You choke slightly on your biscuit. The family photograph is next. The bride is positioned in the middle, surrounded by the contributors. Each of them, it appears, was requested to wear a small tag, indicating where on the dress their contribution was positioned. You spy one marked with left shoulder, Vine M. Beatrice, aged 8. Another reads right cuff braid, E. Barnaby of Waltham. You can't determine whether this is touching or appalling. Then the concluding oddity arrives. An album, naturally. Victorian weddings are nothing if not extensively documented. But this one is not merely photographs or preserved petals. It's snippets, minute samples of hair from each contributor attached next to a drawing of where it appeared on the dress, tagged, dated and bound in supple leather. The bride herself created it a guide. In case of mending, she says sweetly, or replication, should I transfer it to my daughter? There is, as you might anticipate, no discussion of professional cleaning. By now the fire is dim and guests start to depart, drifting out into the mist with whispers and sidelong glances. One gentleman says he'll never regard his hairbrush the same way. A governess jokes she'll begin securing her comb in a cabinet. As for you, you step once more past the dress, which now hangs rigidly in the entrance hall. On display, no longer a wedding garment, but a sculpture of community woven with remembrance, sentiment, and probably scalp particles. You exhale. Still not the most unusual wedding you've witnessed, but it's ascending the list. You arrive at the subsequent wedding in a cloud of lavender, cologne and polished wood scent, guided into an elegant townhouse where the walls are covered with portraits that stare far too intently. It's the kind of occasion where the champagne has already been opened before the guests even surrender their coats. But something's amiss, not in the ambience. It's refined, if a bit rigid, but in the manner people are glancing sideways at the bride's neckline. You drift nearer. Her gown, a refined ivory satin with a conservative neckline, is decorated with an implausible number of trinkets, chains, lockets, stick pins, rings tied with ribbon. Miniature medallions rest across her collarbone, some hanging low enough to tap against her gloves when she raises her hands. None of them coordinate. They sparkle in competing shades of gold, silver, pewter, and every single item as you catch comes from a different unmarried gentleman. You blink. Pardon, what? Apparently it's a tradition in this locale, or maybe exclusively in this family. Before the wedding, the bride dispatches a formal invitation to every bachelor in her extended social sphere, not merely to attend, but to provide a token, a personal ornament, a piece of jewellery they might otherwise wear to courtship occasions. The outcome is dazzling and somewhat ridiculous. Her bodice resembles a pawn shop detonated onto a corset. One particularly brilliant chain belonged to a financier. Another is rumoured to be the stick pin of an opera performer who once proposed to her on a wager. Some of the gentlemen sit now in the audience, adjusting their cuffs, pretending they don't notice their former tokens bouncing on her clavicle like prizes. You spot a compact man in a green vest muttering, "Mine's the one near her elbow." His companion pats his shoulder gravely. The symbolism, as one elderly lady confides over tea cakes, is that the bride carries the attention of numerous but selects only one. It's meant to flatter the groom, but by the appearance of it, he's having a difficult time maintaining a straight face, especially since one of the borrowed rings is too diminutive to fit on her chain and has been fastened quite conspicuously to the back of her glove with a safety pin. The groom whispers something to the bride as they pose for a portrait. She laughs a bit too forcefully. He can't help but wonder if the necklace jingling chorus is going to reverberate all the way through their promises. During the procession, the effect becomes even more bizarre. Every step the bride takes, her bodice chimes. The jewellery rattles softly like distant wind chimes, transforming a solemn march into something vaguely musical. A small girl near you imitates the sound with a teaspoon and is immediately silenced. You glance toward the minister, who clearly didn't anticipate this much metalwork. He leans forward slightly, attempting to speak over the jingling. The guests stifle their giggles, but barely, and when the bride says "I do," the final note of her voice is accompanied by a sharp little clink, one chain slipping loose and dropping to the floor. With perfect comedic timing, the guests erupt into laughter. She grins, retrieves it, and tosses it to the nearest bachelor with a wink. Somehow this is still more dignified than numerous weddings you've witnessed. After the ceremony, the guests flood into the conservatory for the reception. The bride, now relaxed from the vows and the warm applause, circulates among them like a living chandelier, her borrowed ornaments catching sunlight from every angle. You observe her reach for a cup of tea and hear half a dozen chains chime against porcelain. She's radiant, yes, but there's something additional. You begin noticing the looks. The gentlemen whose jewellery she borrowed are lingering each in his own manner. One stands rigidly by the refreshment table, arms crossed, clearly pretending he doesn't notice. Another makes exaggerated quips near the punch bowl, loud enough to be heard by her and her new husband. A third nervously checks his pocket watch, as if awaiting the precise moment he's permitted to reclaim his locket, because that's the other component of the tradition. The bride doesn't return the jewellery until the evening's conclusion. It's a kind of ritual, really. Polite, awkward, symbolic. One by one, each bachelor must approach and accept his trinket back, along with a parting message. sometimes a thank you, sometimes a suggestion. You see it commence. A young attorney approaches. She lifts the silver ring from her glove and slips it into his palm. "May your next offering be accepted in full," she says sweetly. He smiles just a touch too broadly and retreats. Another bachelor, bolder, leans in to request something in return. She gives him the tiniest pressed flower from her bouquet and a raised eyebrow. No more. By the time she reaches the final piece, a substantial gold fob that once belonged to a lieutenant stationed in India, her husband is clearly finished. He's busy examining the cutlery. Still, the bride performs it all with grace, even as she perspires slightly under the layered burden of 40 borrowed memories. And then comes the real twist. One of the ornaments wasn't borrowed. It belonged to the groom. A small, oddly shaped brooch nestled near her collarbone, the only one with no ribbon, no clasp. You overhear her explaining, "He gave it to me years ago. I kept it concealed until today." The room stills for just a moment. Then the applause begins, courteous and orchestrated. You're not certain if it's romantic or calculated, probably both. As the evening concludes, you find yourself next to an elderly gentleman with half-moon spectacles, sipping brandy. "This sort of thing," he mutters, "used to be a genuine competition. The bride made a selection and the rest accepted it. Now it's all performance." You nod, though you're not certain because, honestly, you're a little enchanted. The concept that a woman could parade through a room adorned with the affections of nearly every eligible gentleman she's ever encountered and still depart with the one she desires. That's not just pageantry, that's authority. Victorian authority in lace gloves and rattling chains. And as the bride finally unpins the last ring and folds it gently into a lace pouch, you catch her eye. She winks. And for just a second, you feel the weight of all the eyes in the room. Not on the groom, not on the cake, but on the woman who wore her past like jewellery and declined to apologise for any of it. You step into a courtyard tent, warmed by portable braziers, expecting a comfortable, slightly mundane wedding tea. But the atmosphere is far too animated. There's too much laughter, too many perfectly timed jokes, and every guest appears a little too rehearsed within minutes. You sense it in your bones. Something here doesn't compute. The groom greets you with a nervous smile and an unfamiliar firmness in his handshake. His cufflinks gleam like they've never encountered a cuff before. The bride is radiant, yes, but tense around the eyes. She repeats the same pleasantries with mechanical precision. And then you overhear it, near the roast beef carving station. Two ladies giggling in matching hats. "I was instructed to be someone from her music circle." One whispers, "I'm a cousin from Kent." The other grins, "Though I've never been hired guests." You blink, scan around the room again, and suddenly it's obvious. The crowd is too attractive, too well dressed. There's a balance of ages that feels mathematically suspicious. The bridesmaids all walk in perfect synchronization, despite never exchanging a glance. This wedding is part theatre. You make your way to the refreshment table where a gentleman in an immaculately starched vest offers you a glass of port and introduces himself as Major Albright, retired. You nod courteously. 10 minutes later, you overhear him identify himself as doctor to someone else and to a child, Uncle Percy. You nearly drop your port. Then the truth emerges. This is a reputation ceremony. The couple New Money apparently have hired not just the silverware, the horses and the peacocks. Yes, there are peacocks, but the people from a company in London. You're told they provide social scaffolding. That means performers, acquaintances, even full-on invented uncles. The guests are briefed before the ceremony. They're given backstories. They're trained in proper responses, a whole cast of pretend society. You shake your head. Is this the future of marriage? A plump woman in green leans over and hisses, "The gentleman I sat next to at dinner last week is now her cousin from Devon." She pauses. He's actually a server from Bath. Even the gifts, you notice, have strange labels. From Lady Burnham with affection, the Hargraves of Dorset. Names too grand, too vague. The wrappings are flawless. You suspect some are empty. But here's the twist. Nobody seems upset. In fact, they're having a splendid time. The fake cousins tell better jokes. The fake aunts pinch cheeks with more flair. One little girl coached to call the groom Uncle Basil delivers the most moving toast of the evening. She tears up halfway through and you're still not sure if it was genuine. And maybe that's the point. Maybe in a society fixated on appearances, what matters most is how it appears. Not who was truly present, not sincerity, but performance. You sip your port and ponder. Was your invitation even intended for you? The longer you remain, the more it becomes evident this wedding isn't about family or friends. It's about orchestration. A string quartet plays softly in the corner, and you realise one of the violinists keeps glancing at the groom, too frequently, too knowingly. A planted companion, a former associate, maybe just another performer who took the role too seriously. At the foot of the main table, a silver platter is passed down, offering dainty folded cards with scripted compliments. You unfold yours. It reads, "You look simply ravishing during the ceremony. Aunt Francesca." You haven't encountered any Aunt Francesca. Apparently, neither has the bride. You begin to notice the code phrases. Wasn't it divine? I don't know what happened, but I'm compensated to praise it. They're a very progressive couple. They met 2 months ago and required a story. How refined her background must be. Nobody can confirm where she's from. At one point, the mother of the bride stands to speak. You listen. Her accent is inconsistent, half Surrey, half theatre trained. Her earrings match her gloves too perfectly. Someone mutters she was in The Woman in White last winter. The play, not the wedding. Then there's the photograph arrangement, not just of guests with the couple, but guests with each other, labelled by their assigned relationships, the McAllisters, the Pembertons. A gentleman who claims to be the family solicitor is suddenly observed tying a toddler's shoes in the corner. You observe as a young woman hesitates before greeting the bride. She flutters her fan, uncertain. Finally, she leans in and says, "Hello again, darling. It's been ages." The bride smiles back. "Of course. Remind me, were you from Paris or Geneva?" They both laugh uncertainly. And just like that, the moment passes. Nobody calls it out. Nobody questions it. Because everyone here comprehends the game. Some may have appeared thinking they were genuine guests, only to discover they were extras. And still they remain because there's food, music, drama, laughter, and above all, a sense of being part of something grand. As the evening progresses, the boundary between performance and truth thins. You observe a hired guest pull the groom aside for a serious conversation. Another gives the bride a genuine embrace, their script long forgotten. Someone sings unprompted and others join in. The hired peacocks scream in the distance because naturally they do. And when the dancing starts, it's difficult to tell who belongs to whom. A gentleman in borrowed tails twirls a woman he met 30 minutes ago. Someone exchanges calling cards with Lady Burnham. 2 little girls fall asleep under the dessert table, drooling on lace doilies. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe this strange, glittering illusion is the authentic wedding. Because in the end, what is a wedding but a carefully staged promise? A story you agree to believe again and again, with food and favours, and just enough illusion to make it feel like magic. You depart with a ribbon around your wrist labelled "Dear Family Friend," and for tonight, you are. You arrive at the village hall just as the organ begins wheezing out the opening bars of "God Save the Queen," though it's not entirely clear why. It's not a royal wedding, still the atmosphere is grand enough. Children in stiff collars squirm on benches. Elderly gentlemen puff cigar smoke out of windows, cracked open with spoons. Then the doors open and in comes the bride. At first, all you see is fabric. Yards of ivory satin billow through the archway, swallowing sunlight and scattering petals as it moves. The bride is somewhere within, though she looks less like a person and more like a sailing vessel at full wind. She's wearing the largest hoop skirt you've ever seen. No, not large. Weaponized. It creaks and sways with the weight of history and ambition. The steel crinoline underneath groans with each step, turning corners like a carriage. Not a woman. Her petticoats rustle like sails. A small boy steps too close and gets gently bumped into a pot of stewed quinces. He glances at the groom. He's already inching toward the side aisle, calculating escape routes. The Victorian hoop skirt had reached peak absurdity by the 1860s, when width was more fashionable than logic. You recall reading somewhere that women in Paris had trouble entering cafes. In one London report, a bride attempted to sit for dinner and instead knocked over 2 entire roast ducks and a bishop. This bride, she's about to start her own legend. As she processes down the aisle, disaster strikes. A trailing ribbon catches on a pew. The skirt yanks. A candelabra teeters. The bridesmaids shriek in harmony as a gust of air sends lace veils fluttering into someone's lemonade. One elderly gentleman drops his hymn book, which lands with a thud right inside the curve of the crinoline like a hoop catching a coin at a fair. Aunt Matilda declares it divine. Then comes the staircase. The village hall has 3 stone steps up to the platform, and nobody thought to check whether the skirt could fit. The bride stops, shuffles. The skirt doesn't budge. 2 ushers attempt to lift the front of it like a picnic blanket, but the bride's modesty shrieks louder than her voice. Eventually, someone lays down a carpeted plank like a bridge, and she sails up as if being presented at the court of Neptune. The ceremony begins with the minister sweating bullets, glancing nervously at the bride's enormous circumference. There's barely enough room for him to stand between her and the groom. Every time she breathes, the skirt shifts and squeaks. You imagine the steel coils inside slowly unravelling like the rigging of a ship about to capsize. Still, the vows are said, rings exchanged. The groom wipes his brow. You're half convinced he's more relieved the skirt didn't collapse than that the marriage actually happened. As the crowd applauds, the bride curtsies. Terrible idea. The entire skirt ripples like a jelly mould in a carriage accident. One of the cherubic flower girls is nearly swept into the baptismal font, and yet through it all the bride smiles triumphant because the wider the dress, the higher the status. The harder to move, the harder to reach. This is fashion as fortress, and she wears it like armour. After the ceremony, the guests pour outside into the crisp garden air, eager for jam, tarts and lemonade. But the bride's skirt won't fit through the narrow doorway. Truly it won't. A footman suggests turning sideways. That fails spectacularly. Now she's wedged. Another guest tries lifting the back like a tent flap, revealing an entire ecosystem of lace, tulle and emergency hem stitches. A third, more practically minded, removes the door from its hinges. Everyone cheers when she finally emerges, blinking in the sunlight, hair slightly askew. Her skirt releases a boing, as if relieved to be outdoors. Birds scatter, children laugh, and somewhere near the hedgerow a woman faints from admiration or lack of oxygen. Difficult to say. The skirt, having survived stairs and doorways, now faces its greatest adversary, the lawn. You see it coming before she does. The perfectly manicured grass, slightly damp from morning dew, soft as sponge cake. She takes one step and sinks just slightly, but enough. The hoop traps air, bulges oddly, and then, like a moon bounce gone rogue, lifts. Not high, just a little. Enough to send the bride wobbling with a look that says, "I will not fall in front of my in-laws." You stifle a giggle. So does the groom. They make it to the refreshment table where another hazard awaits. Folding chairs. Aunt Beatrice insists the bride sit for a portrait. She coos, adjusting her brooch and perhaps a biscuit. But here's the problem. Victorian folding chairs weren't built for hoop skirts, not even close. When she attempts to sit, the skirt springs forward, bending the chair legs until they look like a clock melting. She perches instead, floating several inches above the seat, balancing delicately like a stem in a basket. Meanwhile, the photographer arrives. He's lugging a massive wooden camera that looks like it should be printing banknotes, not portraits. He sets up the tripod, adjusts the brass lens, and announces with grave solemnity that the bride must stay absolutely still for 15 seconds. 15 seconds of motionless poise in a 20-pound steel cage. Her smile tightens. A bead of sweat rolls down her temple. One of the petticoats shifts ominously, and just as the shutter clicks, a gust of wind catches the edge of the skirt, lifting it, twisting it, sending it spinning like a carousel horse, the photo a blur of satin and alarm. Still, she laughs, the kind of laugh that echoes into the marrow of the day. Because by now she knows this isn't a fashion disaster, this is legend. Guests are already composing letters about it. Children will imitate it with bedsheets. For years the skirt has eclipsed the flowers, the vows, even the cake. And just when you think it's over, one final moment, the bride stands near the gift table, receiving congratulations. A toddler toddles too close, disappears briefly beneath the hem, and re-emerges, holding a sugared almond and looking triumphant. The bride winks. Built-in nursery, she says. You walk away grinning, the echo of crinoline still ringing in your ears, because that day you didn't just witness a wedding, you witnessed the majestic, chaotic rise and fall of the skirt. You're led into a stately manor house, this time somewhere just outside Bath, with hedges trimmed like chess pieces and gravel that crunches with alarming precision under your shoes. Everything smells faintly of lemon oil, cigar ash, and just a whiff of boiled ham. A butler takes your coat with the grace of a gentleman who's been polishing silver spoons since birth. The wedding is in the drawing room, you're told, so you go. And that's when you notice it. The curtains, the carpet, the furniture, the wallpaper, all in the same pattern, pale green with gold leaf roses and winding vines. The cushions match the drapes, the tassels on the armchairs match the fringe on the lampshades. Even the tea napkins have been hand-embroidered to coordinate. You think surely not. Then the bride enters, and your jaw hits the parquet floor. Her gown is identical. The same green and gold brocade, the same tiny repeating vine motif. Even her veil has been trimmed in the same fringe used on the footstools. She doesn't so much walk into the room as vanish into it. For a brief, terrifying moment, you lose her entirely. One of the bridesmaids gasps. Someone mutters, "She's gone camouflaged." Then she shifts, and there she is again, eyes glinting beneath the lace, lips tightly set, like a general preparing for war. Apparently, the dress was commissioned specially to match the family's drawing room suite. A local upholsterer, well known for his work in horsehair and needlepoint, was enlisted to create an exact replica of the parlour's decor in gown form. Why? Because this is the house she's marrying into. This room, you're told, is where generations of brides have been presented. And this bride, she didn't just want to be presented, she wanted to become part of it. She's not marrying a gentleman, she's marrying the furniture. As the minister begins, you glance over at the groom. He seems nervous, possibly because his bride currently blends in better than the footstool behind her. A footstool that you now notice is dangerously close to being mistaken for her train. The ceremony proceeds as expected. Vows, rings, a few tears. But when they say, "You may kiss the bride," the groom has to pause. He's unsure where her face begins. A ripple of stifled laughter passes through the guests. He adjusts, leans in, kisses a cheek, possibly hers. Afterward, guests mill about, trying to compliment her dress without sounding like they're describing a curtain rod. "It's so cohesive," someone offers. "She looks like home," says another, and you honestly can't tell if that's romantic or unnerving. Once the formalities wrap up, guests drift into the next room for the reception, only to discover it's the exact same space. The bride hasn't simply blended with her surroundings, she's made them her territory. There are no place cards, no necessity. Everyone naturally steers clear of the chairs that mirror her too perfectly. You catch a guest mumbling, "I believe I just took her cousin's seat." They hadn't, though they weren't completely mistaken either. At the refreshment station, the cake seems crowned with candied ivy leaves matching the vine pattern on her dress. Even the linens are stitched with golden flowers. You grab one and look down at your own clothing, suddenly conscious that you don't fit here. You're an outsider in a family textile gallery. But for the bride, this is victory. She moves between the guests like a travelling settee, her train gliding quietly across the wooden floor. The edge makes a gentle sweeping noise like a cloth on a buffed piano. One elderly relative actually sets her china cup on the tail of it by mistake. The bride doesn't react. She's already become part of the decor, naturally. Then arrives the portrait session. A complete photographic arrangement is organised in the middle of the parlour, but the bride keeps vanishing into the backdrop. The photographer tweaks his equipment, shifts the position, swaps the plates. Still, she fuses flawlessly with the sofa behind her. Eventually, they wrap her in a lightly rose shawl, borrowed from the household help, just so she doesn't disappear altogether. It's like capturing a spectre, the man grumbles, dabbing perspiration from his forehead. The guests love it. They describe it as progressive, daring, a statement of unity. But a handful murmur that it's simply odd, that dressing as the residence feels somewhat too lasting, like she's surrendering, not commemorating, merging with the framework. You overhear an older lady lean toward a young relative and whisper, "Remember my words, she'll have herself recovered before she releases that parlour." Yet the bride radiates toward her. This isn't surrender, it's tactics. She has joined a household that takes pride in custom, conservation, and the constant elegance of its sitting room. By matching herself with it, she has secured the premier position in its order, not as a visitor, not even as a spouse, but as an installation. And in a Victorian society where standing was connected to what you could maintain your fabrics, your correspondence, your bloodline, what superior method to announce permanence than to actually dress like the space you intend? Intend to command. As the night concludes, she sits majestically back, upright, palms clasped, face composed. Guests start to murmur their goodbyes, uncertain if they're speaking to the bride or simply appreciating the workmanship on the divan. You, though, see her plainly now. Not a girl drowned in textile, but a woman who grasped the objective. You pass through the grand doorway of the reception area, anticipating the typical Victorian arrangement. Buttered vegetables, congealed meats, and an unsettling quantity of eggs masked as something different. But as you survey around, something feels altered. The table arrangements are flawless doilies creased with surgical exactness, each place card inscribed in a flowing copperplate script. Even the floral displays seem carefully balanced. And then somebody references it, prepared by the residents. A guest mutters beside you, tossing a coated almond into his mouth. You freeze. "Excuse me, what?" He gulps. The kitchen. All managed by the local institution. It's part of their recovery program. You glance down at your dish. A refined triangle of sandwich sits beside a gleaming utensil. You suddenly feel less ravenous. The bride, as it happens, is the daughter of a distinguished physician, one who operates a nearby facility for what the publications tactfully call nervous ailments. But unlike most, he's introduced something culinary restoration. According to the tiny printed brochure resting by the picture, this entire wedding feast, every dish, has been conceived, prepared, arranged, and served by the recovering minds of Belmore House, a small ensemble of cured depressives, gentle hysterics, and reserved eccentrics. One guest chuckles and mutters, "I dare say the foul gelatin may contain 2 layers of sentiment?" You nod, not completely comforted. The opening course is carried in by a young man in immaculate white eyes, distant, humming a classical melody as he steadies 3 bowls. Another trails, grinning proudly, murmuring to himself they claimed I'd never manage heated liquids again. The cuisine is remarkably magnificent. The seafood is cooked to excellence. The produce is sliced into matching crescents. There's a veal aspic formed into the shape of an open volume, and the bread, still heated with butter portions shaped like miniature birds. Guests express approval. One lady proclaims it the most considerate wedding feast she's ever witnessed. "A touch mad," someone says brightly, but rather ingenious truly. But then the dessert emerges and it's violet. Vivid violet. The consistency is debatable, the texture elastic. You ladle a small helping onto your dish and observe it tremble with silent threat. A servant leans over and clarifies helpfully, "It's plum parsnip and laudanum." You lift an eyebrow. He smirks. Joking? You're uncertain. The groom appears mildly troubled. The bride nevertheless shines with satisfaction. She stands to make a speech. "Let this occasion be a tribute not solely of affection," she says, "but of restoration, of the genius that exists in every mind, however it roams." There is gentle, courteous applause. One of the kitchen personnel beams and gestures, holding a plate of seasoned eggs like it's an infant. And somehow, despite the anxiety, despite the uncertainty over whether your gelatin might be murmuring to you, you start to settle. Because it's unusual, yes, unconventional, maybe even slightly improper by elite society measures, but it's also genuine. It's a wedding created not to astonish, but to embrace even those most frequently left. Beyond the hall, the evening feast. One concludes with the soft clicking of utensils on china and the sporadic confused cough when someone tastes a morsel containing quite possibly lavender and preserved beet. Nobody is certain, and nobody wants to question the personnel. The recovering chefs are now positioned in a tidy row near the partition, dressed in fresh linen coverings, their faces a blend of satisfaction and composure. Some rock slightly with fatigue. One man anxiously reorganises a tray of remaining scones by shade, mumbling they shouldn't contact. Not crimson beside yellow. No, no. A guest attempts to offer him a gratuity. He declines. "We are part of the occasion," he says with reserved nobility. And genuinely they are. The groom taps his glass and starts a tribute. It's tender, if somewhat rehearsed. He acknowledges the bride's father for his outlook and the personnel of Belmore House for their tastes and their courage. Then he adds, perhaps unwisely, and for reminding us that no mind is beyond restoration, not even mine after this week. A few anxious chuckles. Someone inhales wine through their nostrils. As the tributes conclude, a young girl starts circulating tiny recipe pamphlets as mementos, handwritten, unevenly bound, filled with scratchy drawings and unclear measurements. One page reads, "To make the gelatin calm, speak to it gently, and never stir," counterclockwise. Another cake rises best when kissed by morning mist. Someone leans in and whispers, "They're mad." Another amends softly, "They're artists." Soon the guests are guided outside for the final reveal. In the garden, beneath a trellis of night-flowering jasmine, a modest cake is brought out 3 levels, slightly tilting but stunning in its decoration. The frosting spells out in glittering sugar lettering, baked with grace by Belmore hands. A silence falls over the assembly. Then a man in a crooked necktie steps forward, cutting the cake with solemn precision. The opening piece is offered to the bride's father, who smiles and wells up in one motion. The second to the woman who sculpted the roses from preserved beetroot. The third to the reserved young man who mixed the frosting for hours, humming a single tone the whole time. The bride cuts the following one. She raises it with firm hands, presents it to her new husband, and says, It's sweeter than sanity, and he responds without a hint of sarcasm. Then I'll have two. By now the sky has dimmed. The scent of flowering jasmine blends with a subtle hint of nutmeg and overheated custard. Laughter drifts across the grass like candle vapour. Someone plays a waltz on a damaged violin, and you realise the peculiarity of this wedding doesn't rest in the cuisine or the cooks. It rests in its refusal to pretend, in its acceptance of imperfection, in its quiet assertion that happiness can come from the hands of those the world has undervalued. You chew slowly, allowing the final bite to dissolve on your tongue. It's delicious, even if you're still uncertain what's in it. You're halfway through your second cup of tea, munching on a jam tart that's crumbling apart in your fingers, when a servant rushes in, flushed, gasping and carrying nothing. He leans into the groom's ear and whispers urgently. The groom blinks, then slowly turns toward the bride's father, seated peacefully near the fireplace, holding a snifter of brandy. "Where is it?" the groom says, through clenched jaw. The older man looks up, blinking innocently. "Where's what?" You already sense what's coming. The marriage license is missing. Not postponed, not smudged. Vanished. The bride's father, a former naval officer and current hobby geologist, had insisted on personally transporting the license from town that morning. A father's obligation, he announced, like escorting her down the aisle, only with documentation. But somewhere along the countryside road, in a moment of distraction or stubborn pride, he pulled the carriage to a halt near a muddy slope to examine what he thought might be a fossilized turnip. You're uncertain whether to laugh or scream. The groom is now striding near the windows, muttering about annulments. The bride has removed one glove and is slowly, methodically twisting it into knots. Within moments, a search party is formed. You, yes, you. Given a lantern and instructed to follow the east hedgerow. Others are sent toward the ditches bordering the carriage path. An uncle in patent leather boots marches off, muttering about bureaucratic quicksand. The sun is dropping fast, and the damp chill of a late autumn evening starts to seep into your sleeves. You crunch along the gravel, eyes searching for anything parchment-coloured. Then someone hollers. It's the bride's father. He's knee-deep in mud, one foot trapped under a collapsed fence post, triumphantly waving a bundle of soggy papers above his head. "I found it," he bellows, "under a hedgehog nest." The cheering is cautious. You rush back with the others to inspect the damage. The license, though speckled with mud and twigs, appears miraculously whole. The ink is smeared. One signature is now partially unreadable. There's a feather stuck to the corner that no one can account for. Still, the officiant accepts it with a weary sigh and lays it carefully between two warming bricks, like a goose sandwich from a Dickensian picnic, while everyone waits for it to dry. The guests are encouraged to improvise. A barrel is rolled into the garden and ignited from within. A bonfire of sorts. Potatoes are distributed for roasting. A few clever children make dolls from twigs and leftover ribbons. Someone pulls out a concertina and starts playing folk tunes at increasingly frantic tempo. And you sit by the fire with the bride's grandmother, who offers you a toasted walnut and says, "This is the most entertainment I've had since 1829. Eventually the license is declared functionally dry. It bears the faint impression of the hedgehog nest and a single unmistakable paw print, but it's legitimate. Barely. The ceremony resumes. The bride is radiant again, cheeks flushed from firelight and frustration. The groom looks like a man who's just wrestled a bear and prevailed. And the bride's father. He grins through the entire thing, mud on his cuffs, a fossil clutched in one hand. Best kind of wedding, he says later, is one that almost didn't occur. The moment the vows are finally completed, license now thoroughly smoked, soggy but legal. The crowd lets out a cheer so genuine it feels like someone just scored a goal at a cricket match. Even the officiant smiles, holding up the damp paper like a victorious parchment scroll. Someone tosses confetti. Someone else tosses a half-roasted potato. You glance at the bride's shoes. now delicately charred at the toe from standing too close to the bonfire. She doesn't seem to care. She's laughing, finally relaxed, her gown trailing ashen ribbon like a battlefield banner. But then a new challenge surfaces. The official wedding register, the elegant red-bound book used for recording names and dates with fine penmanship, is nowhere to be located. The parlour where it had been kept locked, the key lost, possibly in the same ditch as the licence. No one panics. This time, they're all well beyond panic. Instead, someone finds a blank guest book, the kind used for memories and optional verses. The officiant flips to a fresh page, draws a line with a butter knife dipped in ink, and solemnly declares improvised legality. The bride signs first, her letters looping grandly, only slightly crooked from residual adrenaline. The groom follows, careful and deliberate, his signature catching on a breadcrumb left behind by a child who'd been drawing smiley faces in the margins earlier. The bride's father insists on signing last as a kind of bookend to his earlier mishap. He pulls out his fountain pen, still crusted with mud, and scribbles his name with such flourish it takes up nearly half the page. "Consider it a watermark," he says proudly. Once the last name is inked in, a spontaneous reception erupts across the garden. Someone passes around mugs of spiced cider. The wedding cake, which had been quietly melting on a table under the weight of its own marzipan roses, is finally cut, slightly tilted but still standing. You watch as slices are distributed on whatever plates can be found, saucers, napkins, even a few flattened tin pie lids. The bride offers you a piece herself, her gloves long abandoned, a smudge of soot on her cheek. "Sorry about the potatoes," she says. "We hadn't planned on firewood cuisine." You laugh. It might be the best wedding I've ever attended. And you mean it because there's something oddly perfect in the imperfection of it all. The missed steps, the lost items, the footnote about a hedgehog nest and an improvised guest book. It's as if the chaos pulled everyone closer together, like the day chose its own character and everyone just followed. Later that evening, when the music starts, played by a band that was meant to perform inside but instead dragged their instruments out into the garden, you dance alongside guests with muddy boots and rumpled cravats. Even the grandmother joins in, waving her cane like a metronome. The bride and groom sway beside the bonfire, tired but glowing, and when someone hands the bride her singed veil from earlier, she just ties it around her waist and keeps dancing. Because in the end, this wasn't the wedding they planned. It was superior. It was theirs. The ceremony is finished, the toasts have been delivered, the elder cousins are loosening their collars, and someone has already dozed off behind the potted fern. You make your way into the long portrait gallery where the bride has organised a group photograph, one of those Victorian full-body compositions where no one is permitted to blink for 15 seconds. The photographer is shouting directions from behind a curtain, taller people to the rear, hands visible, no smiling. This is for posterity. You're directed to stand near the centre, beside a young bridesmaid in a pale floral dress. She's maybe 17, quiet, clutches a lace parasol like it might float her away. Then the moment arrives. The plate is loaded, the camera clicks, and just like that, it's finished. Except when the photo is developed later, she's not in it at all. Everyone else is there, frozen in grayscale dignity, but where she stood only wallpaper. The guests gather around the print in bewilderment. Someone taps the image with a gloved finger. There, where the rose trellis curls. They say that's where she was, but it's just floral pattern, seamless, continuous, the exact same print as her dress. She had disappeared, visually absorbed by the decor. A great uncle with monocle experience declares it a phenomenon of chromatic congruity, while a governess whispers that it might be a warning from the aesthetic world. The bride is both embarrassed and thrilled. It's as if the house chose to keep her, she says. The bridesmaid herself, when located an hour later near the conservatory doors, seems oblivious anything happened at all. I stepped aside to breathe, she says, blinking. Did I miss the photo? No one quite knows what to tell her. It turns out the wallpaper, cream and rose patterned with delicate ivy, was hand-printed in Paris, a recent addition to the manor, matched precisely by the bride's mother to the new upholstery. And, as it turns out, the bridesmaid gowns. The dresses had been custom-made, meant to evoke the walls, without disappearing into them. Apparently, someone miscalculated. The guests begin calling her Camellia, after the flower she now seems indistinguishable from. She takes it in stride, though she does start carrying a fan with a gold handle, just to give herself an outline. By the time the second group photo is attempted, she's been relocated to stand in front of a window, for contrast, the photographer says through gritted teeth. The photo is taken again. She appears, this time barely, but the legend is born. For the rest of the evening, guests tell newcomers, "You missed it. The girl who vanished into the wall." It spreads like a storybook rumour. People begin posing beside her deliberately, as if standing next to her might bring luck. A few children try to blend into the curtains, hoping to disappear as well. One guest, half drunk on elderflower cordial, kneels beside the skirting board and whispers, "Reveal yourself, wallpaper maiden." The bridesmaid curtsies politely and eats another shortbread biscuit. She's now famous. And the bride? She is already planning to have the photograph framed with the empty patch where her cousin once stood, labelled Eliza somewhere in bloom. Later in the evening, as the moon hangs low over the lawn and the string quartet launches into a haunting rendition of Green Sleeves, the bridesmaid Eliza, now nicknamed the Wallflower Queen, has become the unofficial highlight of the wedding. Children flock to her as if she were part ghost, part celebrity. One bolder little boy asks if she can disappear again. "Only if the pattern permits it," she replies, holding up the corner of her hem with mysterious flair. Another child insists she try blending into the curtains this time. She obliges. It works. The guests start whispering. Theories. She's done it before. Someone mutters, "I heard she once vanished into a bookshelf." No, counters another. It's the fabric, that Parisian cotton. You know the French, always meddling with perception. One older gentleman with excellent sideburns swears, "The pattern isn't just a match, it's alive." "It wanted her," he says gravely as if this were a séance. Even the bride gets in on the amusement. She poses with Eliza near the original wall, pretending to search for her cousin while dramatically calling her name. "Eliza, dear, if you can hear me, blink twice." Click. The photographer captures the moment. It's chaos, yes, but also kind of beautiful. The reception meal resumes, and Eliza is seated on purpose between two extremely patterned armchairs, causing at least one vicar to momentarily lose her. During the soup course, you overhear him muttering. She is gone again before realising she's simply dipped behind a fern. Aunt Millicent, the family matriarch, is unimpressed. "In my day," she declares, "we wore sensible greys and never risked blending into anything." But the younger guests adore Eliza. Her unexpected vanishing act has transformed what might have been a stiff society wedding into something memorable, odd, and strangely joyful. By the time the dancing begins, someone has gifted her a floral sash in navy blue. "So the humans can track you," the card says. She twirls gracefully across the floor, spinning just fast enough to blur, but not quite vanish. And as she curtsies to her final partner, applause breaks out, not for the dance, but for the girl who briefly became part of the architecture. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's what makes this wedding so unforgettable. Not the cake, not the speeches, not even the bride's exquisite veil made of imported Belgian netting. No, what people will remember is the bridesmaid who vanished into the wallpaper and came back with a smile. A reminder, perhaps, that even in the stiffest traditions of the Victorian era, sometimes the magic sneaks in. Not through the flowers or the vows, or the silver spoons, but through one quiet girl in a dress that dared to match the room. By the time you arrive, the air already smells like wet wool, overturned earth, and strong opinions about weather. A grey sky hangs low over the fields, and guests shuffle in beneath a canopy of umbrellas that groan with the weight of rainwater pooling in their folds. You were told this was meant to be an outdoor affair, a garden ceremony no less. Roses, trellises, doves in tiny cages. But Mother Nature had other plans. Victorian England, after all, was no stranger to a sky that turned traitor with only a moment's notice. Still, the event trudges on. Chairs have been relocated to a makeshift marquee, patched canvas held up by optimism, and a few wooden poles. The ground beneath your feet squelches ominously, threatening to steal your boots with every step. A young boy sinks slightly and is tugged free by a governess who hisses, "Heel first, darling, never toe." And then you see the bride. She's not gliding, she's splashing. Each step she takes sends a gentle ripple across the puddles. Her gown, an ivory silk with too many layers for its own good, is gathered at the waist and bundled under her arms like laundry on wash day. But what draws every eye isn't the soaked hem or the frizzed curls. It's the galoshes, sturdy rubber-soled, jet black, the kind of footwear you'd expect on a gardener, not a bride. But she wears them proudly, paired with lace gloves and a determined grin. Someone gasps, someone else applauds. Apparently, she came prepared. They were a gift, she explains, to a cluster of guests sheltering under a pear tree. From my grandfather. He said if I insisted on marrying in a field, I'd better dress for the consequences. You admire that practicality wrapped in defiance. The groom, for his part, is not faring nearly as well. His shoes, soft leather, freshly polished, are now a squelching disaster. His socks, once pristine, peak sadly above his soaked ankles. At one point, he tries to tiptoe across a particularly muddy patch and nearly loses a shoe to the earth's hunger. The officiant arrives late, drenched spectacles fogged. The marriage licence, damp but legible, is unfurled with 2 flat irons. The couple stands together under a crooked tent pole, water dripping steadily into a soup tureen behind them, and still they smile because there's something strangely delightful in all of it. The way the rain has washed away pretension. The way the guests huddled close under mismatched umbrellas suddenly feel like family. The way the bride's galoshes squeak slightly every time she shifts her weight. During the vows, a breeze lifts the canvas flap and sends a fine mist over the front row. They all laugh. The bride does not flinch. She simply plants her feet more firmly, galoshes gripping the earth like anchors. And when it's time to kiss, he dips her slightly, just enough for a splash to arc dramatically into the air. After the kiss, equal parts romantic and damp, the newlyweds wade arm in arm toward the reception tent, which now resembles more of a shipwreck tea party than any formal gathering. The path between the ceremony and the feast was once a gravel walkway. Now it's a thick, reluctant bog, swallowing heels and decorum alike. You watch as one poor bridesmaid, wrapped in a chiffon nightmare, is carried across by a stable boy with shoulders too broad and a sense of timing too perfect. The bride, however, walks herself. Galoshes, squelching veil, soaked hemline permanently changed by the land. And she's radiant. Inside the tent, guests do their best to pretend nothing is wrong. Chairs are hastily dried with borrowed handkerchiefs. Cloaks are hung from candelabras. A roaring fire made of damp branches hisses stubbornly in one corner, more smoke than heat. You find your place at a table already tilting slightly downhill. Water pools beneath it. No one complains. The bride's father attempts a toast, but his notes are soggy. He holds up a paper that resembles a wilted cabbage leaf and says, "I was going to speak of endurance, and now I rather think I'll just demonstrate it." Cheers erupt. Glasses clink. Someone somewhere has lost both their left shoe and their patience. Then the cake is brought out, or rather, what's left of it. Originally designed as a multi-tiered masterpiece with sugar roses and piped poetry, It has suffered slightly from the weather. The icing now resembles peeling wallpaper, and the top tier has developed a lean not unlike the Tower of Pisa. The bride laughs, at least it didn't sink. A groomsman brandishes a dessert fork like a sword and cries for queen and confection before taking the first bite. It's mostly marzipan. It mostly holds together. The real entertainment, however, is the dancing. Someone clears a space on the only patch of semi-dry ground. A wooden platform laid hastily over several stacked crates and old pews. A string trio, somewhat damp, but game begins. A jaunty tune. The bride kicks off the dance in her galoshes. She lifts her skirt slightly and stomps a joyful, squishy reel across the platform, water droplets flying in every direction. The guests roar with laughter. The groom joins in, slipping once but recovering with a dramatic flourish. They whirl and wobble like a pair of weatherproof dervishes. Soon everyone is joining in. Galoshes, boots, barefoot cousins with trousers rolled up to the knees. You find yourself drawn in too by now. Nobody bothers with manners. The tea is muddy. The tablecloths have collapsed. One of the centerpieces has drifted gently into the side of the tent like a floral ghost ship. And yet, it's perfect, because no amount of planning could have created this kind of joy, this strange camaraderie born of ruined hair and soaked sleeves, this wet, wild, real kind of celebration. You glance at the bride one last time, mud up to her knees, hair escaping its pins, face aglow. I told him I wanted adventure, she says to no one in particular. I suppose this counts, and it does. For when the years pass and the guests grow older, they may forget the vows, the icing, even the names. But they will remember the bride in the galoshes, the one who stomped through the mud, kissed in the rain and danced without waiting for the floor to dry. You arrive early, expecting a neat countryside wedding. Modest ceremony, lace bunting, warm punch. Everything looks as promised. Roses tied in ribbon, hymn books neatly stacked, even the organist doing a quiet run-through of Jesu, joy of man's desiring. The guests filter in with the usual rustling, silk, and cough, dampened greetings. A gentle buzz of excitement fills the air, but then an audible gasp from the back. You turn. The groom has arrived, only certainly not entirely. From the waist up, he is immaculate tailcoat, freshly pressed boutonniere, perfectly pinned, collar stiff with just the right hint of starch. His hair is combed, his beard neatly oiled, and his gloves. Oh, his gloves, pure kid leather, white as milk, but from the waist down. Trousers missing. Well, not entirely missing. He's wearing something brown. Linen underdrawers, perhaps, tucked into tall riding socks, boots scuffed from a hurried trot. A bit of hay clings to his shin. You blink. So does everyone else. The bride's mother fans herself with increasing speed. An aunt whispers something about a fever dream. The vicar tightens his jaw and mumbles, "We'll wait a moment." The groom, meanwhile, seems entirely unfazed. "I've had a morning," he says simply, then calmly accepts a cup of lukewarm tea. Apparently he'd set out from his lodgings by carriage, but halfway to the chapel, a wheel gave out. Rather than risk being late, he leapt out and commandeered a farmer's mare in the process. His formal trousers, borrowed, starched, and apparently stitched with far too much optimism, caught on the saddle horn and tore nearly in two. The decision was made. Ditch the trousers. Keep the dignity. It's working. Barely. The bride, waiting upstairs and unaware, sends word asking why the ceremony is delayed. A maid hesitates to answer. There's a situation, she finally manages. One of the groomsmen rushes off to find a tailor. Another suggests simply borrowing a pair from a taller usher. Someone else volunteers to sew him into a curtain, but the groom waves them all away. "I've made it this far," he says, sipping his tea. and I rather think it's become a statement. You begin to suspect he may be enjoying this. A footman tries pinning a decorative runner from the gift table around his waist. The bride's younger brother suggests turning the tablecloth into a kilt. Nothing quite works. The vicar takes a seat with a sigh and mutters, "The Lord did say, 'Come as you are,' but I doubt he meant this literally." Eventually someone finds a forgotten garment bag misdelivered to the kitchen of all places. And, inside, a spare pair of trousers, not quite the same shade and slightly too short, but dry, intact, and profoundly welcome. The groom changes behind a coat rack with the dignity of a man dressing for battle. When he re-emerges, the crowd actually cheers, and then, only then, does the ceremony begin. The bride walks down the aisle, none the wiser until she reaches the altar, looks her groom up and down and lifts an eyebrow ever so slightly at the unfamiliar trousers. A half smile tugs at the corner of her mouth. No words are exchanged, none are needed. She knows something happened, he knows she knows, and both silently agree not to ruin it with an explanation. The ceremony proceeds with surprising grace. The groom, now properly trousered but slightly uneven in tone, charcoal above, ash brown below, stands tall and composed. His vows are confident, his hand steady, though he does glance down once, as if to double-check that everything's still securely buttoned. During the exchange of rings, the bride leans in and whispers something. He stifles a laugh. You catch only 2 words: tablecloth breeches. The congregation remains perfectly solemn, save for the occasional stifled giggle from the back rows. Aunt Isabel, who hadn't heard about the incident in time, is still muttering about modern tailoring scandals. The vicar hurries through the final blessing with the urgency of a man who's witnessed too many unconventional unions in his career. At the reception, the story spreads like spilled punch. Every version is slightly different. Some claim he arrived on foot, clutching half a curtain and a rooster. Others say he rode in bare-legged, like a Highlander on parade. One bold cousin insists he made the trousers himself from potato sacks. And the truth, of course, doesn't matter anymore. It's already become wedding law. And the groom. He embraces it. During the first dance, he twirls the bride dramatically, then poses with one foot raised, showing off the mismatched cuffs for the whole tent. The crowd erupts by the end of the night. Someone's written a ballad. Yes, a ballad. The fiddler sings it between dances, backed by accordion and drum. The groom with half a tux, who gave 0 regrets. It's terrible. It's wonderful. It's repeated. For the next 2 hours, you find yourself seated beside the bride's grandmother, who chuckles softly and says, "That man's trousers will be remembered long after their golden anniversary." And she's probably right, because weddings, especially Victorian ones, love a bit of disorder tucked beneath the corsetry. They cling to stories. They thrive on human flaws. And this story of mud, improvisation, and accidental breaches will be told every time a new generation of this family reaches for a buttonhole flower. As the newlyweds disappear into the evening mist, you spot the original torn trousers, now pinned to the garden hedge with a handwritten sign. In case of emergency, wear with confidence. Perfect. This one was always going to be a spectacle. 3 sisters, all of marriageable age, all engaged within the same 6 months, had decided. Well, their parents had decided that it would be efficient, tasteful, and very Victorian to marry them all at once. One ceremony, one reception, one long, very precisely written notice in the Times. What could go wrong? You arrive at the church and are immediately handed a programme thicker than a railway timetable. Pages of names, hymns, order of procession, family crests, dress descriptions, even assigned handkerchief codes for each bridesmaid. It's organised within an inch of its life. 3 grooms, 3 brides, 3 sets of everything. You feel like you've walked into a wedding that has swallowed itself. The brides are indistinguishable at a glance. All 3 wear ivory lace with nearly identical veils. The youngest has a slightly pink sash, but it's lost quickly in the ocean of tulle. The grooms, to be fair, also look uncannily alike. Moustached, gloved and wearing 3-piece suits tailored by the same Savile Row man. The guests are already murmuring, "Which one is Clara? No, that's Eleanor. Wait, is that the one who nearly ran off with the piano tuner?" Nobody's quite sure. The ceremony begins. The vicar is determined. His voice booms like thunder in the nave. He moves through the triple vows like a man delivering railway announcements. Do you, Harold, Edward, Charles, take Clara, Beatrice? Do you, Benjamin Wardlow Smith, take Eleanor Anne? Do you, Arthur, George, take Louise, Margaret? The problem is no one is listening closely enough. Not the guests, not even the couples, because by the time the moment comes, the great cinematic moment, the part where each couple is to seal their vows with a kiss, things go sideways. It happens in a blink. Bride 1 turns to groom 2. Bride 3 hesitates and reaches for groom 1. Groom 2, flustered, kisses bride 3 square on the cheek. Bride 2 ends up kissing her own sister's hand somewhere. Groom 3 blinks, misses his cue entirely, and kisses no one. There's a pause, a shuffling, a stifled gasp from the back, then laughter, starting small, then rolling through the pews like thunder. Even the vicar exhales and mutters, "Well, I suppose it's legal, as long as they signed something." The brides, bless them, recover with grace. They loop arms and curtsy in unison like ballerinas at curtain call. The grooms stand beside the wrong women for the official portrait. No one corrects them. Not yet. Because by now the error has become the story. You glance at the printed programs. The ink is smudged. Handkerchief codes are forgotten. Someone's labelled a bouquet incorrectly and given lilies to the one who's deathly allergic. It's chaos, beautiful, perfectly dressed chaos. And yet somehow the ceremony finishes. Papers are signed, rice is thrown. Guests cheer with the intensity of people who aren't entirely sure what just happened, but are happy it happened in the first place. The triple wedding has become a triptych of disorder, and the best is yet to come. The reception unfolds in a vast hall, strung with bunting and lined with long tables, groaning under the weight of 3 wedding cakes, each decorated identically, of course. The same icing scroll work, the same sugar lilies, the same small silver initials piped onto marzipan shields. Only the placement of the toppers differs, and even that begins to blur. After the second sherry, a brass band strikes up a cheerful, if slightly confused, waltz as the guests drift in, chattering about the kiss incident. Someone already has a sketch of it. Yes, a pencil drawing hastily scribbled by a young cousin, showing the brides kissing the wrong grooms in comically exaggerated poses. It circulates down the table like a relic. Meanwhile, the bridal couples are trying to sort out their seating. Unfortunately, the place cards have also been mixed up, the calligrapher flustered by late-night edits, and a spilled bottle of ink apparently scrambled the grooms' names. So now groom 1 is seated next to bride 3's mother, and groom 2 is beside a plate labelled Clara. Not that Clara. The guests think it's all part of the fun. You overhear an uncle whisper, "Well, at least it's not a quadruple wedding." Imagine the confusion if there'd been a cousin involved. He takes a large bite of pickled egg and winces with pride. When it comes time for the first dance, the band leader leans into the microphone and says, "If you're married and can hear this, please take your partner." Chaos. Bride 1 grabs groom 3. Groom 1 spins with a bridesmaid until someone taps his shoulder. Bride 2 begins waltzing with her own brother, who politely bows out once he realises. But again, no one is angry. This triple wedding, once meant to be a showpiece of social perfection, has become something far more precious, a joyful, sprawling comedy of errors, the kind of event people will tell stories about at future weddings with a misty look in their eyes and the phrase, "You should have seen the moment." Later, the actual signed registers are reviewed just to make sure the couples are legally correct. They are. Miraculously, though, one bride did apparently sign her married name next to her sister's husband, and the vicar had to draw a small arrow in the margin and initial it. At twilight, when the brides gather on the steps for the bouquet toss, someone calls out, "Try not to throw it at the wrong groom." Everyone laughs, even the fathers. Stoic men in top hats who'd planned this whole thing like a military operation now lean against the railing, smiling with the ease of defeat. You spot one of the grooms adjusting his boutonniere and muttering, "Well, at least I know I ended up with the right shoes." The bouquets are tossed, 3 of them. One hits a chandelier. You stand near the garden later, eating a sliver of cake with the wrong initials on it, and realise this wasn't just a wedding, it was a Victorian parable in motion. That the tighter you plan, the more delightfully the day might unravel. And sometimes the best way to know you've married the right person is realising you both laughed at the same mistake. You arrive at the wedding with no idea what to expect, except that the bride, everyone says, is quiet. Not shy, not withdrawn, just silent, famously so. There are stories gilded and embroidered by gossip over tea trays, that she once went a whole garden party without saying a single word, that she communicates with eyebrow raises and carefully folded paper notes, that the only time she's ever truly spoken aloud was to accept this proposal. The groom, by contrast, is an orator, tall, confident, full of opinions about asparagus and architecture and whether spats should return to formal wear. He smiles often and talks enough for 2, sometimes 3 people at once. When you see the couple together, they're oddly perfect. She nods in just the right places, tilts her head when he rambles, offers a gloved hand to pause him when needed. They've been seen walking the gardens in near silence, only the gravel underfoot speaking for them. It's a strange balance, but it works. And today, apparently, she will speak just once. You find your seat in the sun-drenched conservatory where rows of guests fan themselves with embroidered programmes. The ceremony begins with hushed reverence. The bride enters to a collective inhale, wearing a gown so delicately embroidered it looks like language itself. A script of silken flowers winding around her sleeves. Her veil is sheer, her face calm, not cold, just contained, like a painting hung in the exact right place. The vows proceed. The groom speaks first, eloquent and a touch emotional. You can see his hand tremble slightly as he slips the ring onto her finger. Then the vicar turns to her. "Do you, Miss Georgina Blythe, take this man?" The air tightens. A breeze from the high windows seems to hush even the sparrows outside. The bride lifts her chin and says, clear and firm, "I do." 2 words. That's it. And the room exhales. There is something weighty in it. Not just the sound, but the choice. You feel it ripple through the crowd. Those who've known her since childhood lean forward, wide-eyed. The maids, peeking in from the hallway, look at one another, mouths slightly open. And then, just as quietly, she nods, steps back, and never speaks again. Not that day, not that week, not even during the toasts at the reception. The groom reads her thank you, speech aloud, smiling when he stumbles on the flourishes she'd written in her own hand. She clinks her glass once for approval, twice to tease. The guests begin to speak of her gesture, that one perfectly delivered phrase, how it must have taken days of consideration, how it meant more than all the other vows combined. You hear someone say, "She didn't just say I do, she meant it." And maybe she did. Maybe that's the point. As the reception unfolds, her silence becomes the centerpiece. People begin to notice how she commands attention without a single word, how guests lower their voices when she passes, how even the clatter of silverware softens slightly when she sits down. And she smiles, often, just not verbally. At the wedding breakfast, guests take turns attempting conversation with her. A reverend tries Latin, a gentleman jokes. A botanist offers a flower that supposedly only blooms when spoken to. She accepts each effort with grace, offering nods, eyebrow lifts, the faintest tilts of the head that somehow say more than entire sonnets. She communicates through gesture. A slight tap of her teacup means yes. A hand across her fan means perhaps not. She's fluent in eye contact, expressive in stillness. At one point, a young niece approaches with a napkin and pencil, asking for a written message. The bride writes carefully, deliberately. Speak less, listen more, and never waste your words. The note is passed from table to table, folded, copied, and by dessert quoted in a toast. The groom, glowing with pride, rises to respond. He begins, "I once feared I wouldn't understand her pause, but now I know. She gives every word the weight of a bell in a silent room. When she speaks, the world pauses, and when she's quiet, it listens harder." You glance over, she raises her glass to him, and in that moment, the air shifts. People stop talking about her silence like it's something to pity or correct. They start treating it like a choice, a strength, the great Victorian paradox. In a world overflowing with etiquette manuals and overwrought speeches, this bride says only what matters and says it better than anyone. Later, when the dancing begins, she joins in with the same quiet elegance, one hand on her husband's shoulder, the other lifting the hem of her gown just high enough to reveal embroidered slippers. She glides through the room like a melody you haven't heard but already know. And here's the strange thing. The more the guests drink, the louder they become. Yet the more they watch her, they can't stop. She's still, she's serene, and she's unforgettable. Even the musicians, half-drunk and rosy-cheeked, begin playing softer, slower. One fiddler says it feels wrong to drown her out. The others nod, the music shifts. Near the end of the night, a guest drunkenly stumbles toward her and asks, "Why won't you say more? Don't you have anything to tell us?" She smiles, takes a deep breath and says softly, "I already did." 3 words, no more. The room falls silent, then erupts in applause. Because in a world that demanded women fill the air with agreeable chatter, this bride carved space for herself through stillness and filled it with presence. And long after the cake has been boxed and the chairs folded away, people will remember this day. Not for the flowers or the lace or the speeches, but for the woman who spoke just 3 words and needed no more. You arrive just as the church bells toll 10, and there's a strange hush in the air. The guests are dressed and seated. The flowers, roses, peonies, and feverfew are arranged in flawless spirals along the pews. The bride's veil has been laid out with near sacred reverence. The organist's fingers rest on the keys, waiting and waiting. You glance at the programme. Processional at 10:15, vows at 10:30, cake by noon. It is now 10:45. The whispers begin in the 4th pew. Perhaps he's fixing a cufflink. He's probably rehearsing his vows. No, he's in the vestry. Someone saw him pacing. I heard he had a touch of the vapours. Well, someone says flatly, he better have the vapours and a note from a physician. Then a footman appears. He moves like a shadow, quiet, quick, clearly trying to avoid notice. But in a room like this, silence is a flare. He leans into the father of the bride, whispers something. The father stiffens slowly. He stands and exits through the side door, his steps far too calm. The bride remains upstairs out of sight. 10 more minutes pass. A cough echoes. A child drops a bonnet. The organist plays a slow, wandering tune to fill the space. Then the vicar stands, clears his throat. "There appears to be a delay," he says carefully. "Please make yourselves comfortable." And still no one says it. No one dares. but you know. The groom is gone. Not lost, not trapped beneath a horse, not detained by a misunderstanding about gloves and punctuality. Gone. And soon a second truth unfurls like a gas lamp turned up too high. He's left with the florist. Not the florist's daughter, not the delivery boy, the florist himself. You overhear it in pieces, half sentences slipping between teacups and lace gloves. They'd grown close over the last month, all those private consultations for arrangement decisions. He said he was checking rose quality every day. He left a note. No explanation, just a pressed anemone and the word freedom. The guests begin to shift from shock into something else. Not outrage, not really. Curiosity. Some look amused, others look genuinely moved. A few young women nod slowly as if privately understanding a courage that they themselves might never possess. And then, just as the gossip reaches full boil, the bride enters, not weeping, not screaming, but with her shoulders squared and her veil removed. She walks down the aisle alone, takes her place in front of the vicar and says calmly, "We may not have a wedding, but we will have cake and we will dance." The congregation blinks, then cheers, because frankly, what else is there to do? By the time the shock has worn off, tables are being moved, shoes kicked off and parasols repurposed into decoration. The father of the bride, stone-faced and red-eared just minutes ago, is now uncorking the champagne with a level of commitment that suggests this might not be his first social surprise. And the bride, she changes out of her gown, out of her gloves. She returns wearing a walking dress in bold navy blue, hair let down in a loose, laughing braid. She's no longer the woman who was going to be wed that morning. She's now something else entirely. Host, heroine, and accidental legend. Someone adjusts the guest book where it once said, "Witness to the union of," it now reads, "Witness to the celebration of survival." The band, confused at first, picks up a tune, a faster one, no waltz, something with teeth, and before long, guests are dancing fast, unchoreographed, muddy in places. The vicar politely excuses himself before the polka begins. Over at the refreshment table, slices of untouched wedding cake are passed around without ceremony. The top tier is saved. No one knows quite why. Tradition, perhaps, or maybe just hope. A cousin suggests it be mailed to the runaways. This earns a slap on the wrist and a laugh. Someone starts a game of charades in the corner. Someone else uncorks a second bottle of port. And you. You find yourself seated beside the bride's grandmother, who is busy buttering a scone with militant precision. "She'll be fine," the old woman says without looking up. "Better, in fact. You don't want to start a life with someone who tucks a note into a geranium and bolts." You nod and glance toward the bride, now spinning with a friend of the family in joyful barefoot rebellion. Her laugh rings louder than any toast could have hoped for. She's not performing. She's owning the moment. As twilight falls, someone lights lanterns, not for romance but for continuation. Because this day will go on, not in the way it was planned, but in a way that's truer to the bride than any scripted vow could have delivered. And perhaps that's what everyone here will remember. Not the missing groom, not the note, not even the whispered he left with the florist. They'll remember her. How she stood up, how she turned chaos into celebration, and how, in the absence of a promise from someone else, she kept a promise to herself. To live, to dance, to eat the cake anyway. It's 2:30 when you step into the music hall. A grand old theatre with velvet curtains, gaslights flickering along gilded sconces, and a faint whiff of past performances still clinging to the floorboards. The usher hands you not a wedding programme but a playbill front cover. One night only, the matrimonial debut of Mr. Lionel Wexley and Miss Dorothea Crane. Inside, cast list, running time, and a warning that late arrivals may not be seated until after the bouquet toss. You're not at a church. You're at a performance. The bride and groom, both stage actors of modest fame, have decided to merge their two greats. matrimony and melodrama. Why choose between spotlight and vows when you can have both? The theatre fills with guests, some in lace gloves, some in opera cloaks, many looking slightly confused but delighted. A few of the older relations murmur about impropriety. A wedding is not a pantomime, one aunt whispers. It is when the groom used to be a pantomime horse, her nephew replies. The lights dim, the curtains rise, and there they are. The couple stands centre stage beneath a rose-strewn proscenium with footlights casting a romantic glow that flatters even the stiffest corset. The set behind them is no altar. It's a hand-painted Victorian garden complete with paper swans and a fake willow tree swaying slightly from an overhead draft. The officiant enters stage right. Yes, he enters with a flourish. He's a real vicar, apparently. But he's also been cued by the stage manager, and there's a round of polite applause as he steps into his spotlight. "Dearly beloved," he begins, his voice echoing across the painted balconies. "We are gathered here today in box seats and in stalls to witness a most unusual and heartfelt union. The audience is enraptured. The vows are theatrical, of course. The groom proclaims his love with Shakespearean flair. 'I do thee wed, as constant as the moon upon yon painted scrim.' The bride responds with her own flourish, 'And I, with heart unmasked, do take thy name and thine rehearsal schedule.' The crowd laughs. Some weep. Someone tosses roses from the gallery. They exchange rings as the orchestra plays a gentle refrain composed just for the occasion. The oboist gets a bit emotional and squeaks on the high note. No one minds, and when they kiss, a cue is fired. Backstage, the house lights blink twice. A mechanical dove flies briefly over the audience before crashing softly into the third row. The audience cheers and the curtain falls. End of Act 1. As the curtain lands with a gentle thump, the audience, yourself included, erupts into applause. Not the polite wedding sort, but true theatrical clapping, rhythmic, enthusiastic, with the occasional foot stomp and a rogue bravo shouted from the dress circle. Then the orchestra strikes up again, a quick tempo waltz. The red curtains part once more, and the newlyweds emerge not in a carriage or down a marble staircase, but hand in hand, bowing centre stage like stars of a matinee revue. A voice from the wings announces, "Please remain seated for the reception." You blink. Did they mean intermission? No, they meant reception. The stagehands roll out a refreshment cart dressed like a Victorian tea trolley. Tiny cucumber sandwiches pirouette on doilies. Petit fours balance precariously on the edge of a prop fountain now flowing with lemon punch. The wedding cake arrives on a platform that once held Hamlet's grave. It rises in tears, theatrical and entirely covered in gold leaf. The bride cuts it with a stage sword from Richard III. The crowd gasps. She takes a bow. Your programme has a hidden second page tucked underneath, marked Act 2, Audience Participation. It starts with spontaneous toasts shouted from scattered seats, including one actor who proclaims, "May their union be less doomed than Othello, steadier than King Lear, and nowhere near as wordy as the Winter's Tale." The laughter comes genuine, full of warmth. The bride lifts her glass and silently mouths no guarantees. Dancers suddenly flood the stage, joined by groomsmen who've traded cravats for waist sashes and launch into choreography learned that very morning. It's awkward, exuberant, and wildly out of sync. The audience loves every second. Even the ushers start handing out candy to the front rows. Caramels, mints, crystallised violets, like opening night at a grand premiere. Then as evening deepens, the lighting dims. A single spotlight finds the newlywed seated stage left, chairs pulled close, her head against his shoulder. The chatter fades, the orchestra goes silent. Quiet descends and the groom delivers one last line. No prompt, no manuscript. "We created this ending ourselves." Applause comes again, but gentler this time. And you understand this wasn't just novelty. This wasn't merely theatre. This was truly them. Two people who brought their complete selves into the most intimate public moment, who offered their happiness like a show, not from needing attention, but from understanding theatre's real gift is making strangers feel like kin. Walking out through the grand entrance, someone hands you a commemorative playbill. You check the final page. Thank you for witnessing the premiere of Mr. and Mrs. Encore continues for the rest of their days. And suddenly, that fourth wall between ceremony and magic feels less fixed. By the time this one arrives, you're completely saturated with weddings, another cravat, another ribbon-wrapped invitation, another guarantee of cucumber sandwiches and conventional promises. But stepping into the Great Hall, something feels wrong. Not the flowers, though they're oddly displayed in teapots. Not the music, though the pianist is clearly reading everything for the first time with dramatic flourish. It's the furniture. Nothing coordinates. A chaise longue sits beside a church pew, a Queen Anne chair positioned next to a milking stool. Someone's already settled on what looks like a fainting couch, propped on books, and every piece has a label. Not a place card, a price. You stare. Is this all for purchase? Before you can inquire, a lanky man with an auctioneer's bell turns out he's the bride's second cousin, scales a stepladder and rings it sharply. Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please? Before the soup course begins, we'll start bidding on the love seat from Aunt Winifred's parlour. The crowd chuckles. You receive a paddle. You anticipated dessert, not paddle. Numbers. Apparently this is entirely intentional. The couple, you learn, are relocating overseas. An artistic duo, poets and printers. Rather than abandon their cherished but mismatched belongings, they've chosen to auction everything piece by piece during their own wedding celebration. You look around. The guest 2 spaces over sits on a mahogany corner bench, starting at £4 or best poem. Another woman cools herself with a bidding card labelled Lot 19. Rococo bedside table, mildly haunted. And the bride? She's glowing, laughing openly, standing near a bureau currently serving as the cake platform. She wears no veil, only a crown of dried herbs and twine. Someone offers 3 shillings for the hat stand beside her arrival spot. The groom makes a toast. But it's not about romance, it's about possessions. To the chair that creaked under my grandfather, to the wardrobe that sheltered my sister 2 summers running, to the sideboard that witnessed our first argument and our final. Apple tart. Guests lift their glasses. It's unexpectedly touching. The auction continues. Some guests bid from nostalgia, others from rivalry. One gentleman battles valiantly for mismatched dining chairs, only to surrender them to a vicar who apparently collects orphans and pairs. Even children participate. One small girl raises a sign for a rocking horse and receives thundering approval. Between courses, paddles shoot up like dandelions catching wind. You consume your soup while hearing people debate over a grandfather clock that no longer functions but appears magnificent by candlelight. Every object carries a history. Every sale prompts a small theatrical reaction, or cheerful. You question the woman beside you about their reasoning. She shrugs. They figured, why not let their household become everyone's keepsake? Let their history furnish someone else's tomorrow. It's strangely meaningful. And the longer you observe, the clearer it becomes this isn't simply a wedding. It's a living estate auction. A moving verse, a final tribute to the objects that witnessed everything before this day. When the main course appears, delivered on a buffet table that's also available for bidding, the entire space crackles with energy. Discussions shift from the bridal bouquet to sideboard history, from honeymoon speculation to do you suppose I could fit that footstool in a carriage? Each course arrives with warmth and sometimes a tale. This punch bowl once contained marmalade an entire winter, a bridesmaid declares, pouring ladlefuls into mismatched teacups. The ladle's more recent. That's available too. The bride's father stands beside a credenza, accepting silent offers with a twitch of his moustache. He's surprisingly skilled at it. Intense eyes, raised eyebrow, an atmosphere of theatrical danger that transforms the bidding competition over a needlepoint ottoman into social combat. Meanwhile, the bride moves between tables with a journal and charcoal pencil, sketching who purchased what. "I just want to track where everything travels," she says. "It's like distributing diary pages." By now, half the seating has been swapped with borrowed stools, crates, and in one instance, a friend's lap. Guests don't object. There's something freeing in the chaos. A maid of honour balances on a bread bin and proclaims it the most comfortable perch in the hall. And guests aren't simply taking home furnishings, they're taking home narratives. One couple purchases the clock despite it being broken 20 years. "It'll resume when it's prepared," the wife says, smiling. A widowed aunt wins the settee where she courted her husband, tears forming as she strokes the worn fabric. A cluster of cousins combine funds to secure the mismatched silverware because nothing about this family ever coordinated anyway. The concluding item is the bride's writing desk, carved oak, marked with ink, covered with notes, love letters, abandoned sonnets. The hall quiets as she raises the inkwell, exposing a ring-shaped mark. "He proposed at this exact spot," she says, her tone gentle but certain. There's a brief silence, then the groom rises, approaches, places a small tag on it. "Not for purchase." The audience exhales, claps. The desk will accompany them wherever they're bound next. As evening dissolves and the hall grows darker, guests start transporting their acquisitions to carts and cabs, laughing and juggling side tables like circus acts. The groom rolls out a small writing chair and someone yells, "Careful you don't auction yourself with it." The bride smiles. He's unavailable, and you finally exit with a single candlestick tucked under your arm. Bought perhaps for more than its value, but filled with a peculiar warmth, because at this wedding, nothing coordinated, not the seating, not the sequence, not even the tales shared over port, yet somehow it all belonged, a marriage of transition, a celebration of recollections. A farewell not just for a couple, but for an entire history. And as candles burn lower and the piano delivers the closing notes of a borrowed waltz, you comprehend something. This wasn't merely a wedding, it was a home dissolving with dignity. You arrive anticipating the standard lace lilies and enough lace on lilies to impress royalty. But what you discover instead is a riot of colour-coded pandemonium. The initial hint, the invitation which included an unusual footnote. Upon entrance, guests will receive their cake assignment, dress appropriately. You assumed it was humour. It wasn't. At the hall entrance, beneath garlands of sugar roses, a uniformed attendant solemnly presents you a card reading your designated. Lemon cardamom. Please wear tones of yellow, white or gold, citrus-themed accessories welcomed. You blink. You're dressed in charcoal grey. The attendant frowns. You're directed to the lemon cardamom area, an entire section of the reception tent bathed in soft yellow bunting, embroidered table linens and centerpieces displaying tiny candied lemons. Surrounding you, guests sport marigold sashes, canary silk gloves, even one gentleman in a waistcoat coloured like custard. Across the tent, you notice a swirl of pink rosewater cake territory. Adjacent to it, a patch of brown and cream treacle toffee. Guests toward the rear, near a series of alarmingly unstable trestle tables. A bright splash of green pistachio pear contingent. The bride and groom, apparently, are consumed with cake. Not merely serving it, but embodying it. Each guest received advance assignment of a cake flavour through some cryptic formula. Family connection, astrological chart, compatibility and spiritual weight, a cousin clarifies over a lemon tart. You observe as guests attempt to decipher the meaning of their flavour. One man in a mint waistcoat leans closer and whispers, "I don't particularly enjoy pistachio." "What does this signify?" A rosewater guest answers, "It signifies you're here to reinforce the floral atmosphere. of the occasion. Try avoiding too much bitterness. Nobody's certain if she's serious. The bride appears dressed not in white, but in a gown of stacked pastel tulle, the complete range of the cake selection. She resembles a magnificent tiered dessert herself, each layer a distinct shade of confection. The groom wears a lapel of miniature spoons and a necktie decorated with icing flowers. A fondant boutonniere sits delicately on his jacket. His boots are decorated in marzipan detail. You squint. They might legitimately be marzipan when they deliver their grand address. It's not about romance or faithfulness. It's about flavour harmony. "We believe," announces the bride, wielding a miniature cake knife like a sceptre, "that the ideal wedding should be structured like a gâteau. Complex, sweet, somewhat ridiculous. The guests celebrate, or possibly they just chuckle nervously. It's ambiguous. Shortly the cake itself arrives. It is massive. Each tier represents a flavour. Your flavour. 5 layers frosted beyond recognition. Guests swarm toward the tier they've been designated, raising their place cards like boarding passes at a terminal. And here's the catch. You may only dance after consuming your assigned slice. The bride's decree. Someone protests. Someone else rushes toward their section with a fork. You sample your lemon cardamom portion and find it remarkably delicious. Sharp, warm, and strangely empowering. By the time you reach the dance floor, you're no longer a guest. You're a flavour representative, and this is merely the start. The dance floor becomes a spinning showcase of dessert-inspired chaos. The Rosewater guests waltz like they're drifting through a spring meadow. The treacle toffee group all stamps and shoulder pops as if channeling the confidence of their sticky slice. The pistachio pear delegates naturally attempt a waltz merged with Morris dancing, inventive, nutty, somewhat off-rhythm. And your group, the lemon cardamoms, oh, you radiate. You enter the rhythm with enthusiasm, literally. Someone tosses a handful of lemon peel confetti skyward. A violinist launches a sharp, citrusy jig. You dance with a woman in golden gloves who smells slightly of bergamot. You feel as though your hips are being mixed by a pastry chef. And then arrives the flavour competition. "Ladies and gentlemen," announces the groom from an elevated platform, previously the cake cart, "it's time for the bake-off waltz." What unfolds defies reason and physics. Each flavour section must execute a choreographed group performance set to a classical composition chosen to complement their designated cake. Rosewater receives Debussy. Treacle Toffee receives a tuba, heavy polka. The lemon cardamoms are assigned a frantic tarantella. And the reward? A golden whisk. You're uncertain what it represents, but your section desires it intensely. The competition launches. You're pulled into a frenzy of sugar-themed improvisation. One man mimes zesting a lemon with his coattails. A woman twirls while pretending to sift flour. Someone else quite dramatically whips egg whites by rotating in place until they collapse. The audience bursts into laughter, but it's not entirely silliness, because amid the absurdity, something enchanting occurs. Strangers connect. The cake theme, the flavour designation. It pushes people together to dress alike, to converse, to consume from the same tier, to dance like fools, and celebrate like family. Across the tent, the groom raises the golden whisk overhead like a victorious commander to the lemon cardamoms. He announces, "Wait. What? Your section has prevailed. There's no trophy display, no address. Just a spontaneous collective embrace and a flurry of lemon-scented confetti. You're laughing, winded, grasping hands with someone whose name you never learned, but whose movements you'll recall forever." As the evening concludes, guests receive tiny containers holding a sliver of cake matching their original flavour. Each is labelled with a tiny verse. You came for cake, you remained to dance, you departed with happiness, an icing on your pants. You shake the bride's hand as you depart. She smells faintly of vanilla and victory. "Thank you," you whisper. She winks. You tasted wonderful. Later, at home, you find yourself reopening your little cake container again, not to consume it, but to smell it. A quiet keepsake that once upon a time you danced your way into someone else's narrative, designated by flavour and emerged golden. The invitation guaranteed elegance, tradition, and a passage through the 7 stages of courtship. You presumed it was poetic embellishment. It wasn't. You arrive at the specified time, 3 o'clock precisely, only to find yourself guided into what resembles a waiting parlour. Velvet seating, embroidered screens, and a handwritten notice resting on a music stand. Phase 1, the glance. Please remain seated until the first gown is displayed. You blink. Gown. A silence falls as gentle harp music starts. Curtains separate slightly at the distant end of the room, revealing the bride for the first time. She's in gown 1, a soft blue muslin dress with delicate embroidery intended to represent the early attraction. Her hair is minimally adorned and she remains silent. She glides through the space once, then vanishes. The guests applaud courteously, some puzzled, some fascinated. You glance at your neighbour who whispers, "I heard she studied theatre at Lady Margaret Hall, became quite into symbolism." 5 minutes pass, a bell chimes. A footman enters with a scroll. Phase 2, the letter. Intermission for tea and gentle speculation. You sip your tea and attempt to predict the next dress. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, gown 2. Now she wears soft ivory with gloved hands holding a satin envelope. Her hair is arranged higher, her expression more resolute. Still no speech. It becomes obvious that each gown signifies a romantic phase, and each phase must be witnessed, contemplated and analysed as if you were part of a living gallery exhibition, and the bride is the masterpiece. Gown 3 is velvet deep burgundy to indicate passion. Gown 4 is storm grey taffeta combined with dramatic earrings and a lowered gaze. Conflict. Guests start taking notes. A cluster of elderly women near the punch bowl start rating each dress on execution and emotional authenticity. "I thought the hemline on the argument dress was slightly aggressive," one murmurs. You find yourself increasingly captivated, engaged. Gown 5, white with yellow touches, represents resolution. The bride appears carrying a single daisy. She positions it in a vase and departs. You realise you've stopped monitoring your watch because somehow she's made you feel like a participant in her emotional path without uttering a word. And there are still 2 dresses remaining. By the time gown 6 arrives, the room has fallen into reverent stillness. Gone is the playful murmuring or courteous clapping. Guests sit, as if in a playhouse, postures erect, expressions hushed, watching a woman slowly descend a curved staircase in a shimmering gown of soft silver. This one is titled Devotion. The bride's hair is now completely styled, crowned with a delicate filigree comb that sparkles in the gaslight. Her movements are measured, intentional. One gloved hand grazes the railing, the other holds nothing. No bouquet, no letter, no symbol. She walks the length of the hall, pausing only once to catch the groom's eyes across the space. He hasn't shifted this entire time. He's been observing her through every dress, every phase, and in this instant something shifts between them. It feels less like a fashion display and more like a promise. There is no applause when she departs, just silence. And then, at long last, arrives gown 7, the concluding dress, the wedding dress. You anticipate white, ivory, something magnificent. But what enters the room is simpler, gentler. A cream-coloured silk gown with no decoration, no frills, no veil. Instead of fanfare, the bride walks directly to the centre of the hall and speaks her first words of the entire occasion. "You've waited long enough." The guests laugh, not because it's amusing, but because it releases the tension. She smiles at the groom, who approaches with equal composure. They meet in the middle, clasp each other's hands, and recite their promises with no priest, no official, no script. Just two people speaking quietly into a room that has become entirely theirs. Then finally, a single bell rings, and the true festivities commence. Musicians launch into a bright tumbling reel. Trays of wine and sugared violets appear from nowhere. The bride changes one last time into a loosely styled version of gown 7 paired with dancing shoes and a laugh that hasn't ceased since you catch her at one moment near the refreshments. Why 7 dresses, you ask? She shrugs, because falling in love doesn't occur all at once. I thought I'd wear the complete story, and that's precisely what she accomplished. Later, that night, when you're home and removing your own singular, admittedly boring outfit, you think about what it would be like to dress for every version of yourself, for every chapter, every change, every turn of the heart. It's curious how a wedding can make you examine your own love story, even if it's still being composed. It's already an unusual wedding when you realise that every guest has been assigned a prop, not a party favour. A prop, like in a stage production. You walk in and receive a small brass bell tied with ribbon. The usher, dressed like a stagehand, says, "Only you'll know when to ring it." You turn, confused, and notice a woman clutching a feathered fan. A man walks by holding a velvet pillow with no obvious purpose. Someone near the rear wears a sash labelled Act 3. The entire wedding is a scripted production, literally. Each guest received, as earlier, a sealed envelope containing their role. Some were readers, some were background ambience. You lucky you were in the bell choir. You didn't take it seriously at the time. Now you're starting to panic. The ceremony starts exactly at 4 p.m, introduced by a booming voice from nowhere. Act 1. The introduction of characters. The groom enters to polite applause. He waves awkwardly. The bride follows, but not down the aisle. Instead, she bursts through a side curtain, fanning herself dramatically with a script and sighing, "My cue is early again." Laughter ripples through the space. This is not simply a wedding, it is a full-scale Victorian theatrical wedding, a style fashionable among certain creative households in the 1870s when amateur dramatics were immensely popular and marriages became an excuse to stage elaborate productions. In drawing rooms, gardens, or rented theatres, you notice that everything surrounding you, lighting, seating, even the food trays, has been arranged like a set. Set. Painted scenery lines the rear wall. The chaplain appears to be an actor. A dog barks, and someone from the audience shouts, "That's not in the script." The groom responds without hesitation. Then, cut to intermission. Someone actually dims the lights. You're halfway between thrilled and deeply perplexed. And then the curtain lifts. Yes, an actual curtain. Curtain. Act 2. The Great Misunderstanding. It's a brief play. The bride pretends to reconsider. The groom pleads with Shakespearean intensity. A bridesmaid collapses into a chaise-longue with a fan to the forehead. The crowd erupts. At some moment, someone behind you strikes a triangle. You instinctively ring your brass bell. It's the correct moment. The bride halts, turns toward the sound and says, "Ah, the signal." We continue. You're in it now, and the show must go on. By the time Act 3, the reconciliation, begins, you've stopped attempting to distinguish what's genuine and what's staged. The groom kneels dramatically beneath a papier-mâché arch, labelled Destiny. The bride, holding a velvet script like a holy book, delivers a monologue about the chaos of love and the inevitability of fate. Her voice wavers, whether from emotion or theatrical training. You're not sure, but she receives a standing ovation. Then arrives the strangest turn of events. The best man moves forward, clears his throat, and announces gravely, "It is time for the guests to decide." Decide. Attendants distribute small paddles, rose on one side, navy on the other. You're told to raise rose if you believe the bride should pardon the groom. navy if you think she should escape and take the long road through Tuscany. It's ridiculous. It's wonderful. The paddles rise up. A wave of rose, scattered navy, mainly from youngsters. The bride scans the space, then waves her own rose paddle and declares, "Very well, he may stand." The groom springs upright, a flower gripped between his teeth. You're weeping now, from giggling, from happiness, from bewilderment. It all melts into one thick, sugary Victorian mixture of theatrics and earnestness. The drape descends, then lifts once more. Act 4. The real promises. No longer performing, the pair now faces each other, not as performers, not as exaggerated characters, but purely as two souls who've invested weeks creating something genuinely absurd and are now deeper in love for it. Their promises are brief, genuine, unscripted, and that's the revelation. The spectacle was the armour, but this is the centre. They slide bands onto each other's hands, chuckle when they fumble, and finish it with a kiss. After one final beat, so the matron of honour can shout, "And scene." The celebration is equally dramatic. Visitors are urged to stay in character, whatever that signifies for your position. You occupy a table with a lady still gripping her theatrical parasol of sorrow, and a gentleman whose sole purpose was to exhale at crucial moments. Everyone receives a customized booklet to keep. Your name appears under supporting cast, bel ensemble section. You feel strangely accomplished. Before departing, the bride offers you a flower. It's synthetic, coated gold with a small note. Thank you for performing your part. You travel home singing the prelude they performed during the dessert ceremony, and you understand something. Perhaps the oddest weddings are the ones that resemble life itself most. Chaotic, rehearsed, impromptu, slightly excessive, and completely memorable. It starts with a vessel. Not a symbolic one, an actual 20-foot mahogany planked rowing vessel balanced carefully on a velvet stage in the centre of the parlour. You gaze at it. Everyone does, because the announcement read, "Please dress nautical. We shall be wed upon the beaches of our dreams." And obviously, they were serious. This is the SS marriage, a meaningful craft constructed by the bride's relative, a hobbyist boat builder and devoted sentimentalist. Throughout the space, the covering is decorated with currants. Paper seabirds suspend from above. There's even a subtle hint of ocean breeze in the atmosphere, courtesy of someone cleverly igniting dried seaweed near the glass panes. The bride and groom connected at a boating society, you learn, but that's not truly the essence. The essence is they desired to commemorate the start of their union with a journey of the spirit, and they were determined to bring everyone along. You're given a chart not of the location, but of the schedule. It features destinations like Isle of Initial Encounters, Reefs of Uncertainty, Tempest of Disputes, Temporary Safe Anchorage of Making Amends, Harbour of Wedded Happiness. And evidently each phase will be acted out as part of the ritual. The attendees are arranged in layered half-circles around the waterfront. The presider, costumed as a naval commander, moves forward, acknowledges the assembly, and starts. "Beloved travellers, we greet you aboard this most unusual craft. Please confirm your souls are completely vertical and in the secured setting. There is a chime, a water sound effect, a wisp of vapour from beyond the divide, and then from the corridor, the bride appears. Indeed, appears. She's wearing a tailored ivory dress, with a strengthened border, positioned backward in a double boat being guided along by concealed cables. She paddles gradually, purposefully toward the middle where the groom awaits, also in complete maritime costume, grasping a telescope and beaming like a person about to wed both his beloved and the whole concept of fantasy itself. As the bride's rowing vessel entrance finishes with a soft collision against a velvet pier, the groom reaches out a palm and assists her step onto land. She giggles, not the delicate variety, but a complete light-hearted giggle, the kind you'd anticipate from someone who just traversed a wedding path designed like an oceanic stream. The commander officiant, references a worn parchment. We now arrive at the Isle of Initial Encounters. He declares, "Here our travellers will remember the first moment they noticed each other." And they proceed, right there before you. The bride and groom alternate, sharing with the room how they crossed paths, not in some whirlwind of destiny, but on a soggy platform, debating over whose paddles had been accidentally switched. The tale is modest, tender, absurd, just like this whole event. The expedition proceeds. They recreate the tempest of disputes by each throwing a small fabric weight into the metaphorical ocean, identifying one thing they've disagreed about, he states. Washing, she states, speaking during reading. The attendees understand. The ocean absolves. At the safe anchorage of making amends, they present each other small tokens. He offers her a sketched navigation tool. She offers him a compact container with the inscription "Tolerance" carved. Then, at last, they reach the harbour of wedded happiness. This is the moment where the commander takes off his cap, lowers his head, and addresses not as a figure, but as a close companion. His tone mellows. The performance dissolves. What remains is the pledge, a plain, undecorated commitment to navigate life's waters. United, they trade bands attached to miniature buoys. When they embrace, the assembly doesn't explode. It releases one extended, delighted sigh like a wind across calm seas. At the celebration, visitors sip drinks with labels like First Expedition and Commander's Remorse. They move beneath meshes decorated with twinkling lights. The wedding dessert is constructed like a beacon tower, and as you depart homeward, maritime-themed, keepsake in grasp, you peek back one final moment at the SS Marriage, still present, softly illuminated, a representation of a love peculiar enough to navigate beyond tradition and appealing enough to carry a whole gathering with it. Now that the final melody is finished and the velvet rigging is taken down, you settle yourself beneath the blankets, still grinning at the recollection of drifting vessels, performance lights, metal chimes, and brides who displayed their complete emotional journey in 7 gowns. It's peculiar, isn't it? The way individuals in the Victorian period, proper, buttoned up stiff, discovered such wildly inventive ways to convey love. They transformed weddings into performances, riddles, artworks, expeditions, and symbols. They pursued each other with teacups, wires, and tango movements, and somehow it all felt perfectly natural. Because when you consider it, a wedding isn't merely an occasion. It's a platform, a surface, a vessel, a show, a jest, and a commitment all woven into the same silk edge. You imagine the rowing vessel once more, anchored in the centre of a packed space, firelight dancing off the liquid, decorated surfaces. You detect the soft ring of a stage bell. You recall the instant when someone rose up in a bodice or a mariner's hat and said, "I love you enough to make it strange." And you consider, maybe that's the most touching thing of all. So, continue, shut your eyes, let the drape descend. The musicians are silent now, but the narrative continues on.